Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. I'm Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I'm joined by my co-host.
Jason Harris. Nope. Can't. Nope. Sorry, Josh. I can't do it. This intro has been banned.
Yes. Jason has now been arrested and we will never speak his name again. So.
Z.
Yes. That is exactly what we're talking about here in this season of Awesome Movie Year. We are talking about the films of 1969, and we are here at our foreign film pick, which is Z, from director and co-writer Costa-Gavras, a Greek filmmaker who worked mostly in France and then later in the US. And he too was, I guess he wasn't banned, but he did flee Greece during this period of repression and dictatorship and worked abroad. But this film is, I guess, technically not specifically set in Greece, but as the disclaimer sort of says at the beginning of the movie, it is very specifically based on a particular incident that happened in Greece in 1963, which was the assassination of the politician Grigoris Lambrakis, and this is a fictionalized version of what happened to him and afterwards, based on a novel from 1967 by Vassilis Vassilikos. And the regime that sort of organized the assassination of Lambrakis was still in power when this movie was released. So this was extremely timely and risky for a lot of these people to be involved with, even if they were not at the time living in Greece anymore. So a very powerful project that these people undertook at this time.
Josh, what a history lesson you've given all of us. And kudos to you on your Greek pronunciations.
Oh, no, not at all.
Opa, Josh, opa. Yeah, last week I had said we're going to Greece, and you said, well, it's French. And it's like, nah, really, if we're going to be honest, we're going to Algeria, which is where they filmed this picture. But it is definitely all about the incidents with the Greek junta, Josh.
Yeah, it is. And I mean, it is that kind of international thing, though. Like you said, they filmed it in Algeria in French with mostly French actors. And Algeria, of course, has its own very rocky history in terms of colonialism and dictatorship and all that stuff. And a lot of the reviews that I looked at compared this movie to The Battle of Algiers, which is a movie from a few years earlier that is similarly very politically activated and is, has that same kind of raw quality and so on. So this movie was submitted as the Best Foreign Language Film Oscar nomination from Algeria. So, I mean, it has this sort of multinational origin. It won that Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. It also won the Oscar for Best Editing and was additionally nominated for Best Picture, for Best Director, for Costa-Gavras, and for Best Adapted Screenplay. It is the first movie that was ever nominated for both Best Picture and Best Foreign Language Film, and it was the second ever non-English language movie nominated for Best Picture after Grand Illusion, which was 30 plus years earlier. It was a box office success too, grossing $17.3 million, which is fairly impressive, I think, for a film like this that's very challenging and political.
I'm going to jump in because I saw it when I was doing the research, when I saw it was 17 million, I thought that's a huge number in 1969. It would be like if it made 148 million today, Josh.
Wow.
So that's amazing, right?
That is a huge number. And I think it speaks to not only the quality of this film, but I think how interested people were in what was going on politically here, which is something that maybe we don't know a lot about now. But this was a very much, sort of in the zeitgeist at the moment that this movie came out. It also won the jury prize at the Cannes Film Festival, which is essentially like second place, as well as the Best Actor award at Cannes for Jean-Louis Trintignant. It won the Best Foreign Language Film Golden Globe. It was nominated for 5 BAFTAs and won there for the music. So hugely acclaimed awards-wise, successful with audiences, a big deal movie at the time that it was released.
Yeah. So, Josh, to go along with those facts, when it won the Best Foreign Language Film at the Golden Globes, they refused to accept it because they thought they should have been in the Best Motion Picture Drama category. So I thought that was a baller move of them. Like you said, it won a ton of other awards, and it is the only film from Algeria to win the Best Foreign Language Picture.
So critics,
you could tell he was fascinated by my facts, huh, Dave?
Those are good facts. Those are. I wonder if I should have looked up if the Battle of Algiers was submitted or nominated. Obviously, could not have won.
Yeah.
It is a classic, and I'm sure there's other Algerian films over time that have been nominated. But it's
I'll tell you
tough.
what didn't win: the Battle of Shaker Heights.
No, it didn't win any awards.
Shout out Shia LaBeouf.
Yeah,
and Project Greenlight.
So critics were also very positive about this film. Roger Ebert named it the best movie of 1969. And he said, "It is a film of our time. It is about how even moral victories are corrupted. It will make you weep and will make you angry. It will tear your guts out." These would seem to be completely political events, but the young director Costa-Gavras has told them in a style that is almost unbearably exciting. Z is at the same time a political cry of rage and a brilliant suspense thriller. It even ends in a chase, not through the streets, but through a maze of facts, alibis, and official corruption.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of alluded to it, Josh. This is when people really cared about stuff, you know?
People care. Some people care now.
I know, but, we're not as, tuned in, I think, overall as, the 60s, obviously, probably the greatest decade for protests, Josh. If I'm going down my decades list of protests, I'm going to take 1960s as number one. You know what I'm going to take as number two?
What?
1730s. I don't know.
You had some sort of brilliant insight to offer there, but apparently not.
Maybe in the 1600s when Martin Luther posted the 95 Doctrine in 1600s.
Man, we're really getting into it here.
But and also my co-point to that, Josh, was not only did people really care, this was at a time where movies could affect change, right?
Right. I mean, and I do think that it's possible for those things to occur now. But yes, absolutely, this is something that made a big splash in that way. On the other hand, that junta lasted for another 5 years beyond this. So it's not like this toppled that regime or anything like that. And Ebert, elsewhere in his review, talks a lot about that political context and how this is relevant, to the U.S. And almost all of these reviews also talk about protests against the Vietnam War in the U.S. And as Ebert points out, the U.S. supported at the time the junta in Greece. They were fully backed by the U.S. government.
You're telling me the U.S. backed a militaristic regime in another country for its own self-interest at some point in time? I don't believe you, Josh. That never happened.
Thunk it.
And if it did, this is certainly the only time in history that it ever happened, right?
Absolutely shocking. But at the same time, I was impressed with how boldly Ebert just stated this as part of his review. So this was certainly something on the minds of critics as they were watching this film.
Look at that, Josh. Look at Dave. Look at Josh. He's talking about Ebert taking bold political stances, not trying to bang co-eds when he was in college.
Oh, he was definitely. I mean, I'm sure if we looked through all of his reviews this year, although this is early in Ebert's career, I feel like it was more late Ebert where he really was into reminiscing about his youthful indiscretions there. So Paul Schrader also named this one of the best movies of 1969. He had it in the top 3. In his review in Coast FM and Fine Arts, he said, "Costa-Gavras Z is so shattering, so viscerally potent that you are naturally suspicious of it, thinking you've been duped into accepting a left-wing ideological package in the same way people accepted social liberalism in the 30s or anti-communism in the 50s. The viewer will have been duped, of course, but by nothing so conventional as plot or theme. He has been enticed and manipulated by a new manner of experiencing events and ideas. On the most superficial level, Z has an immediacy and urgency rare to propaganda films. The filmmakers of Z are not concerned with a movie mogul's platitudes, but with the principles and reality by which they live and possibly die. The filmmaker's sense of immediacy transforms itself into style. Z is a film in a hurry, always trying to get ahead of itself, to explore itself. Z gives the impression that although it cannot tell the whole story, it will squeeze in as much as possible.
So, I mean, is there a filmmaker that you could see more akin to writing a story based on Z, or, remaking Z as an English language film than Paul Schrader? Like, this is right up his alley, don't you think?
I guess. I mean, Paul Schrader is not necessarily an explicitly political filmmaker, I think, in this same way where you would expect him to do, although I guess he has done some true life stories. But I feel like if he made a movie like this, it would be more allegorical. But it's definitely on his wavelength.
Yeah, he might take it in a different direction. But, we've talked about Redford a bunch this year. This would be a Redford style movie. When you research this movie, Josh, it comes up with like a list of a who's who of, filmmakers who have either been influenced by it or who say it's their favorite. Paul Greengrass and Aki Kaurismäki both listed it in their top 10 of all time for the Sight and Sound poll in 2012. Michael Haneke, Schrader, John Woo, all filmmakers we've talked about, although Schrader only as a reviewer at this point, have all listed it as their favorite films. Of course, you have Oliver Stone, John Milius, Soderbergh said it inspired Traffic. And then my favorite was from a more filmmaking standpoint, this quote from William Friedkin, who cast a bunch of actors, or at least two, from this movie in The French Connection. After I saw Z, I realized how I could shoot The French Connection because Costa-Gavras shot Z like a documentary. It was a fiction film, but it was made like it was actually happening. Like the camera didn't know what was going to happen next. And that is an induced technique. It looks like he happened upon the scene and captured what was going on as you do in a documentary. My first films were documentaries too. So I understood what he was doing, but I never thought you could do that in a feature at the time until I saw Z.
Yeah, I think of Oliver Stone, I guess, from that list as the most akin to this and the someone who would make a movie like this. But that documentary feel is definitely there. And I mean, we keep mentioning the Battle of Algiers. That has a similar feel. On the other hand, I wouldn't necessarily say this is purely like documentary-esque. There are a lot of sort of French New Wavy jump cuts and some like kind of surreal moments that come up here that are clearly, artistic license and fictionalized approach, which I appreciated and like, but it doesn't necessarily come off fully documentary-like.
I agree. I mean, to me, it was just like really nifty camera work more than cinema verite, so to speak, because, and I marked some of those shots down while I was watching it. Like, there's a shot where some of the thugs are going to go attack, the protesters, and you're just seeing the protesters in the point of a moving car, and the car turns the corner, and then the camera turns into the car. So we see who's driving it, and you see the protesters go out and kind of move catty corner across the street to, beat up the protesters. I'm like, man, I watched that shot twice in a row because it was so amazing. But I would say you're right in the regard of like Stone, like from a subject matter standpoint, might fit this the best. But like we're saying, someone like a Friedkin with French Connection, I thought of American Hustle a lot, like a lot of David O. Russell style, which Scorsese obviously has similar camera moves and everything. So there's a lot going on here. Very stylized, a very good looking film.
Yeah, it really is. And that's why I guess I feel like I don't compare it as much to a documentary, because there's clearly a specific style visually that he's going for it. And it's not just like what the camera happened to capture. So finally, critic-wise, Pauline Kael in The New Yorker said, "It is almost intolerably exciting. A political thriller that builds up so much tension that you'll probably feel all knotted up by the time it's over. The young director Costa-Gavras, using everything he knows to drive home his points as effectively as possible, has made something very unusual in European films, a political film with a purpose and, at the same time, a thoroughly commercial film. Z is undoubtedly intended as a political act, but it never loses emotional contact with the audience. Remember when the movie ads used to say, 'It will knock you out of your seat'? Well, Z damn near does."
Not if you see it in 4D. There's probably a 4DX. They would have like a seatbelt for you or something.
Dave is a big fan of the 4DX. You want to go see Z in 4DX, Dave?
That would be the way to see it.
One movie we've definitely talked about in the past that you can, is an admitted influence from Z, but also you could just tell is Argo. So yeah, I mean, this is a good film. I had never seen it. I'm glad as you know, Josh, it was on my watch list for a while.
Sure. Yes.
You know that.
That's an extensive watch list that I'm very familiar with.
Josh has a watch list where he's watching my watch list.
So had you seen other Costa-Gavras films, Jason?
This is my first foray into Gavrasian. No, that's not true. I've seen some of his English language films like Mad City, which isn't as good. So.
Yeah, I mean, his English language films, I guess, are a little more uneven. And I had seen this movie a number of years ago. I didn't remember almost anything about it as I was watching it again. So it felt like a new discovery, but I had watched it at one point. And I have also seen Missing, which is probably his most well-known English language film. And that is quite good as well. And one of these, I was trying to recall which one of these movies we had watched in our film club with Tony Macklin. But whichever one it was, obviously you were not there at that time, Jason, because you hadn't seen either of those.
I had a lot going on in my life back then, Josh. So
yeah, that's fair.
But I do love political thrillers. I mean, and they're tough to pull off. So it's good when you catch a good one like this.
Yeah, and this is, of course, what he's primarily known for, is what all these critics are talking about here, that he kind of became known for first for this film, which is this combination of thriller and very specific political statements. So, Dave, had you seen this before?
I had not, but it was probably on my watch list as well, Jason. So,
well, Dave, I expected as much, knowing how much you hate reading, and this is just a one-letter title.
Makes it a lot easier. Absolutely.
Well, he did have to read a lot of subtitles, though, so that might have been tough.
Was a bit unfair.
Yeah.
So
stupid movie.
Had you seen any other Costa-Gavras films, Dave?
No, I have not.
So, all right. Well, we're new to this filmmaker for the most part here.
You and I have each seen one other movie. I feel
one. But I mean, he does have an extensive filmography, which I'm sure we'll talk about later, that we didn't quite delve into deeply here. But we'll talk more about this.
Well, I was on the road. You guys have no excuses.
Jason, anything else you want to say about the background of this film?
I think we've talked a lot about it, Josh. So I think we're pretty much there, ready to go into the next segment of our podcast.
We'll come back and talk more of our general thoughts on Z. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about our foreign film pick, Costa-Gavras Z. And earlier, Jason, you were mentioning that you noted down a number of shots here, or visual moments that you were impressed by, and you mentioned one of them. Are there any other ones that you that stood out to you particularly?
Well, Josh, I mean, there's the I think it's like a long shot of one of the murdered politician's advisors, where a car is chasing him, right, and it chases him onto the sidewalk and chases him through the park. And that's just a harrowing sequence, and it's shot really, really amazingly. And you're seeing this, this car try to run him down, like literally through these like columns of a building and then into a public park. I thought that was pretty awesome. I thought the fight on the back of a moving pickup truck, or they called it the kamikaze, those were two like really, really slick sequences that had purpose and stood out for me.
Yeah, I think that speaks to the idea that this is a thrilling and suspenseful movie. I mean, especially that sequence there, which occurs later in the film when we have a better sense of like the sort of extent of the conspiracy. And you see this character who, right, is one of the advisors or allies of the guy who was assassinated, and he's trying to get to testify about what he knows, and this car that will just not stop trying to run him down. And it's like a little car chase in a way. And you're definitely on edge about, is this guy going to survive? Is he going to make it to testify and to share what he knows?
Yeah. And I think we see a lot of this in films set in Europe, less so in films set in America. Like car chases down like really tight spaces are always interesting because of the confinement and the claustrophobia. And while this was an open space, it had that feel because of how tight the streets and the areas were.
Right. I mean, one thing that stood out to me early in the film, and I think this goes to what I was saying before about this doesn't necessarily feel entirely documentary-like to me, is, and it was a little confusing to me at the time that it happened, and I feel like I get it now, but you see the politician who's going to give this speech, played by Yves Montand, and he is coming to the hotel where he's going to stay, and we see this attractive woman in the window of like a shop arranging a mannequin or something like that. And he has these flashes of her, and I wasn't sure if that was like some sort of fantasy or whatever. And I think it's meant to represent whether he actually like slept with this woman or he's been cheating on his wife or whatever. And the idea that he's not this like saint or whatever. And especially because the wife becomes an important figure after he is attacked and he's in the hospital and then he dies and she's held up almost as this like martyr. But at the same time, it's not like they were having this great relationship. But the way that those flashes come again, like sort of a French New Wave thing with these jump cuts back and forth, I thought was really impressive and caught my attention.
Yeah, I marked that down too because it's so disorienting, right? And
right.
When I was doing the research, I think Gavras had said like, hey, no, it wasn't that he had an affair with this woman, but it was to show that he's human and has human urges. And he probably had, I think we saw that he had other affairs in the film, right? But I do think it was effective because like it jolts you out of what you're watching. And that kind of really fits along with like the themes of this whole thing. There's a few of those sequences, like when we find out that Yves Montand's character dies from the attack. And then we already know he's dead, but then we flash back to his wife learning that about the attack. And it's like, it's very strange sequencing. And, you know, we don't get a ton from her point of view. So like, that was interesting. And he does all these, like you're saying, French New Wave style, experimentations, I'd call them, and they really add up, I feel like.
Right. And it is disorienting. And I think it's deliberately disorienting. I mean, the other thing about this is that this movie has essentially no protagonist, and we really jump around at different points to who are we focusing on. And I think especially early on, you're really thrown off, like, who is the main character here? Who am I meant to care about? Who am I meant to be following? And we have some of those advisor characters who start out, and then you get Yves Montand shows up, and you think, okay, this guy, I mean, first of all, he's top billed. He's a very famous actor. And then the character clearly is a political leader. And it's like, okay, this is going to be the main character. But no, then he's assassinated, and we see him in a few flashbacks like you were mentioning. But overall, he kind of disappears. And it's not until maybe halfway nearly through the movie that we get Jean-Louis Trintignant as the magistrate, who then kind of takes over as the main character. But we're still taking all these detours into other characters, the assassins themselves, and the guy, the varnishing guy who's going to be testifying against them, and so on and so forth.
That guy's yeah, you're right. And of course, the military leaders who are, in charge of this whole conspiracy and everything. And yeah, so I love that guy, though, the dude who is going to testify, the varnishing guy, because I marked down like every time you see him, his mom is feeding him, and it's always just like cheese and wine. And like, I was just amused that, if you were to argue that this is taking place in France, I thought that was a good argument for it. But, I was amused by that. All these characters are unique. I do feel like the story lends itself to that. I mean, you could really blow out any aspect of it and follow any of the characters, but it worked for me. I could see if you were saying like, hey, I would like to know more about that advisor who was chased through the park, because he was obviously such a major player in there. But it all kind of adds up in the end.
Yeah, I think it took me a while. I actually, even though, like I said, I'd seen it before, I didn't remember anything about it. And like halfway through the movie, I paused it and went online to look up information about the real events because I felt like I was confused. And I think if I hadn't done that, I would have eventually put it all together as the movie went on, as I think you are meant to. But it is disorienting. And I think that is part of the point. Whether audiences at the time would have all been familiar with this. On the one hand, as we say, this was clearly a big news story, and all the critics who are writing about this are clearly very familiar with it. Whether average audiences would have been as familiar with it, I don't know. But I think you do get a sense of it by the end. And one thing about having that big ensemble is you get the chance for those detours with fun little characters like the varnishing guy, and you do get to know him, right? Why is he? I mean, on the one hand, he's key to the case to be made against these assassins that they murdered him and that it wasn't an accident. But on the other hand, he's kind of this goofy comic relief character, and his primary motivation for testifying is like, hey, that guy got in the newspaper. I want to be in the newspaper, And he's got his sister who's yelling at him. And a couple reviews that I saw complained about that stuff as like maybe too goofy, but I thought it was perfect because it shows you that within even this super serious case, people have all sorts of random selfish motivations, and he's very adamant that he doesn't care about any of the politics and he just likes soccer, and I liked all that stuff.
I agree. The sister's yelling at him because her husband is a police officer and he has the ability to take his brother-in-law down with this story. So there's all types of, kind of side roads that the film takes that work. And I also think, the stuff that leads up to it, while Montand's character is still alive and the military, like, oops, you didn't get a permit to use that hall, you have to move your meeting. Like, even those little building blocks that don't sound that exciting, like, how are we going to find out how to have this meeting? And it's like, just put the speakers outside. The people will be able to kind of create their own momentum. I thought all of that worked really well too.
Yeah, and it puts you on their side even when you're not really sure what exactly they stand for necessarily. And I thought it was interesting that even as the movie went on, I wasn't entirely sure what they stood for. I mean, it was clear that the government is repressing them and that there is this conspiracy, but what little we hear of the speech that Yves Montand gives is kind of generic. Like, we should all be in favor of peace. And sure, of course we should. So that was interesting. They keep being accused of being communists, but it doesn't seem like they really are communists. So again, maybe if you are more familiar with all the specifics, you would put that together. But I think it's not necessarily important to understand the key to the story here, which is that they are saying something the government doesn't want them to say, and the government is going to cover up this guy's death.
Yeah, they did a real deep dive on that. There's also a lot of good humor in this, like we just talked about, Josh, with that dude who's getting wine from his mom. There's the military leader, like you're saying, they're all prejudiced, they're all bigoted, right? And they're like, at one point he says, I think he's a Jew, and he goes, no, he's a half Jew, and he goes, a half Jew, worst kind. They feel superior even to other Jews, and it's so racist. But as a Jew, I found it funny, Josh.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's meant to be funny because of their ridiculousness, or the other moment when like late in the movie when seems like the military leaders are all going to be, they're being indicted, and there's sort of this like almost slapstick bit where they all keep trying to go out this one door that's locked, and we see it over and over and over again. And then related to what you were just talking about, one of them, he's forced to go out alongside all the reporters, and one of them yells at him is like, are you like Dreyfus, the famous French the Dreyfus affair, the guy who was falsely accused or whatever, and the guy yells, Dreyfus was guilty.
Right.
Like, even in this, even there in this like historical incident that everyone knows is a famous injustice, this guy is going to be on the wrong side of it.
Right. I marked that down as well. The other thing that I thought was really cool, and I'm really glad we're talking about this because we talked earlier in the season about like Downhill Racer and how bad, the score didn't match the movie. I thought this score by, let me see if I can do it as well as you, Josh, Mikos Theodorakis, there we go, was really good. And he was banned in Greece, this composer. So I thought there was an extra element to that of just using his music on there, but it was real energized, kind of like the political climate of this time and in this area. And I thought it really worked well.
Yeah, and he's one, unlike a lot of the other people who would have been banned and had fled, like Costa-Gavras and the novelist whose book this is based on, and Irene Papas, the actress who plays the politician's wife, the widow. They had all fled Greece, but that composer was still there and had to like smuggle out the music that they used in this film. So, I mean, it makes me think of now we read about, these Iranian filmmakers who are under house arrest or they're banned from making films in Iran, and they make films covertly and they smuggle them out so that they can be shown at film festivals and, stuff like that. And so it's something that's still happening today.
Yeah, it's strange. Also, Josh, I think we got to mention that, this is about a political assassination, but the guy doesn't get shot. He he gets hit on the head with a club multiple times. It's pretty graphic that way.
Right. Well, and not only that, but then he survives for several days and undergoes all these surgeries. I mean, it's a terrible, agonizing way to die, I'm sure. In real life, it's not entirely clear in the movie, but I think in real life, the guy survived for 5 days before he finally died in the hospital. And they do at least 3 surgeries on him that they mention. And the surgical theater, I don't know if that's in a real hospital or if that was a set, but it looks like this weird science fiction-y place. And you have all these like cops and political figures like overlooking the surgical theater as they're working on him. And it's very surreal and kind of, panopticon-esque when they're doing that. So whether it was a real place or not, definitely the right environment to shoot that in.
I mean, you are the expert on Algerian geography, so you would know better than the rest of us.
Definitely not. No, I am not. So I feel like we also have to mention the one kind of key character that we haven't mentioned yet is the reporter played by Jacques Perrin. And
our buddy, awesome movie, your all-star Jacques Perrin, Josh.
Yeah, there you go. Yep. He is. Several figures here.
We have a lot of them,
talked about before over the course of many decades of different awesome movie years, which is pretty cool. But I mean, I think what I liked about both him and the magistrate played by Jean-Louis Trintignant is that neither of them are political activists. They're both sort of out to do their jobs. And if it happens to be that doing their jobs brings down this political regime, then that's just the way it goes. The magistrate is determined to find out the facts of this guy's death. And when he determines like, hey, it wasn't an accident, this guy was murdered, he feels like he has to take that as far as it can go and find the real culprits and hold them accountable. And the reporter is just looking to sell papers, is just looking to get a good story that people want to read. And if that, again, involves finding out the truth about this cover-up, then that's what he's going to do. But I thought that was interesting that these are people, it's kind of holding this up as like the ideal of, hey, if you do this job and you do it the way you're supposed to do it, this is the way society would and should function.
Well, Perrin's character, though, does bring up a lot of good points because when he's going to write the story or publish the pictures, all of Yves Montand's like advisors are like, oh, you're going to put it in like kind of our, leftist, supporting paper. And he's like, do you want people to read it or not? Right? Like, I'm going to put this in the biggest paper that there is, and you'll get the most kind of effective momentum because of that.
Right. But again, he's not doing it because he wants their cause to succeed. He's doing it because he wants to be in the biggest national paper, right? And he's telling them what they need to hear in order for them to agree. But it's not because he is necessarily on their side. It's not because he's not on their side either, but you get the impression that he would be happy to write a story about the regime. And in fact, one of his colleagues, right, we see early on, one of the assassins is clearly friends with this reporter and gets him, like feeds him information and gets him to put in the paper what he wants. So obviously it's not like the whole press is on the side of the leftists.
Well, that's pretty clear in any kind of political kind of totalitarian government, I'd say. But there is a great sequence, Josh, where Perrin's character is getting all the information on the military advisors and also the just kind of citizens who were involved in this conspiracy. And his source is like driving him around and he's taking pictures like through a moving car. It's a really, really good sequence, I think, too.
It is. And it also shows like how prevalent this anti-communist right-wing organization that's covertly supported by the government, how prevalent they are, because the guy is driving him through this neighborhood and seemingly every person, it's like, right. Oh yeah, that guy, that merchant, the guy selling figs and the guy sitting there outside the bar and the guy who owns the bar and that guy there and that guy there, they're all part of it.
Right. All different classes from the top to the bottom. And when you're talking about those kind of techniques, they even go back and show one of those meetings of the kind of military right and talking about how they have to keep the left in check, which in this country would never happen, Project 2025.
Yeah, exactly. I did think, though, one thing, right, we have that sequence and where, like you said, they're kind of driving around in the car and he's taking photos as they're going. But there's other sequences where he takes photos of people who don't want to be photographed. And he's like, oh, OK. And then he's just holding the camera by his side and clicking it very loudly over and over and over again. I was like, there's no way these people didn't notice that he's covertly taking photos.
I think it's because Perrin, he's a handsome gentleman and they got lost in his eyes, Josh.
It could be. He does he has that kind of floppy hair in this film. There's a great moment where they're arresting protesters and they start cutting one of the guy's hair.
Yeah.
The cops, like right as they're grabbing him at the protest. I thought that was hilarious.
Yeah, like we said, a lot of like kind of subversive humor in here. Dave, what do you think, Dave? You read the book. Is it as good as the book, Dave?
Yeah, Dave loves reading books.
Yeah,
especially
absolutely.
Greek political books.
How much time do you guys have? No, I liked it too. I a lot of the things you guys have been talking about, I really appreciate the way it looks. I thought it was just incredible. I really like the score that Jason brought up. Those action sequences were well placed in the midst of a lot of stuff that, quite frankly, I couldn't quite follow 100%. But like Josh was saying, a lot of that is kind of the intention of the film anyway, is to kind of mix you up in what's going on and who the main characters are. And we wouldn't really quite know that. But, it's an easy film. Even if, as we get to our ratings, I didn't rate it super highly. Like, it's an easy film to see why it's so beloved and why it's so influential.
Should we talk about the ending? Because the ending is great. And I love the gut punch of it, right? Because it goes against what we expect or hope for from a movie like this. Because I feel like there's so many of these movies, especially in the US, where it's all about like the underdog, the one guy who fought against the corporation and revealed this corruption and they were held accountable. And it does happen sometimes here, and when it happens is when we make movies about it. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of expect that. And that's what we build all the way to up until the very, very end, right? We have this magistrate, the Jean-Louis Trintignant character, who is so upstanding and he holds people accountable and he doesn't listen to his bosses who tell him to just let it go. And he charges these higher officials with first-degree murder. And we see one of the former advisors to Yves Montand's character rushing over to the widow and saying, "We've done it. We're going to topple this regime. We finally revealed the corruption." And you think, oh, this is a great story about how these people were brought down. And then smash cut to Jacques Perrin and him just going down this like relentless list of how nobody was really held accountable. All of the people who were trying to fight for justice were then jailed or murdered. And then the moment that to me is the best there is that after he has gone through all of that, we freeze frame on him and some other random voice tells you what happened to him.
Yeah.
And I love that, just the sort of bombardment of that, and then it's over. And you're like, oh yeah, no, everything's terrible. That's good to know.
Right. So they're all dead. All the military, conspiracists pretty much get off, scot-free. And then, like I said, Josh, they also give you that list of everything that was banned by that military junta after that.
Right. Including like Aristophanes and things like that. Like
pop music,
Well, right. But also like the bedrocks of Greek culture and how and why it influenced like the entire trajectory of Western civilization over thousands of years has also been banned.
I just want to say, Josh, you've many times said you're anti-murder on this show. I'm anti-junta.
That's a fair thing to say. Yes. And the junta committing murders also, we should say we are against.
Yeah. All types of juntas, but especially the murderous ones, not for us here on Awesome Movie Year. So if you try to take over our podcast, it's we're going to fight back.
Yeah, we're taking a real bold stance here. Really, really risking nearly as much as the filmmakers involved in making this movie, I think.
You're right. It is a cool ending. I think we've kind of hit all the bases on this thing. Should we rate this thing out of 5 Zs? Should we say what Z means, at least, Josh?
It is a Greek letter or representation of a Greek letter that means he lives. And this is the sort of the rallying cry for supporters of this politician who was murdered.
Right. And that is taken from the real life incident. So I think we do it out of 5 Zs, Josh. What do you think?
Yeah.
I gave it 3.5. I'm really glad I watched it. I would definitely be down to watch Missing and other Costa-Gavras movies after this.
Yeah, I give it a 3.5 as well. And looking back, the first time I watched it, I guess I gave it 3. So I liked it more this time, I suppose, although I didn't really remember. But I think the confusion is maybe a little too much for me, but overall, this is a really well-made film and a fascinating story and absolutely worth seeing. So 3.5 from me. Dave, how would you rate this?
3 Zs from me. I'm very happy I got a chance to see it.
All right. Well, we'll come back and talk about the legacy of Z. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1969, we are talking about our foreign film pick, Z. And as I mentioned earlier, despite the wide attention that this would have brought to the Greek junta, more so even than news reports or whatever, it wasn't necessarily able to bring it down. I don't know if it might have been a factor ultimately, but this junta did continue until 1974 when it finally collapsed and was replaced with a democratic regime. But that's a long time. And it's a big risk for these people involved in making this movie to put this out there while that government was still in power.
Right. I think you're correct there. One of the leaders of the junta, like the characters in here, refused to admit any guilt. In the film, they were like, I could never admit guilt. I'd rather kill myself, right? And none of them do that. But in real life, the leader was jailed, and they offered him, they're like, hey, dude, you can get out of jail anytime. Just admit you did something wrong. And he never did. And he spent the last 26 years of his life in jail. Ha ha, dumb junta.
Well, at least he was held accountable, unlike most. So Costa-Gavras, again, he grew up in Greece, but had left as a teenager and lived in France. This really catapulted him into that major international filmmaking world. And he continued to make a lot of movies like this, as we've said, movies that combine these thriller aspects with political statements. The Confession and State of Siege were right afterwards, I think, that are well-known political films. Missing, as we mentioned, probably his biggest mainstream movie. And he did go on to make some English language movies that are, seem to have gotten a mixed response. That movie, Mad City, Jason, that you mentioned, I don't think is particularly well regarded.
I didn't love it. The Confession seems like the one to watch, and Missing as well. Josh, he has a movie in development right now. I hope it gets made. Get one more Gavras out there called Last Breath. Dr. Augustine Masset engages renowned writer Fabrice Toussaint in a philosophical dialogue exploring life and death. A series of profound encounters guides Toussaint to confront his fears and anxieties.
Yeah, I mean, he is still working. His most recent film that he did make was in 2019 called Adults in the Room. And it seems like it didn't get great reviews, but I did find it fascinating that this film, another true political film about the financial bailout of Greece, was the first film in his entire career that he was able to make in Greece after all that time.
Yeah, that's kind of wild right there. His co-writer on this, Jorge Semprún, is a Spanish writer and politician who also was exiled, or, maybe it was self-exiled, but he lived in France. I think it was probably like self-exile because of the Franco administration. After that collapse, though, he was the Minister of Culture in Spain's socialist government from 88 to 91. And he has nominations for writing Z and The Confession, Oscar nods.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the fascinating things, the idea that these people are persecuted and banned and exiled, and then when the government changes, they can come back and be involved. I mean, two of the Greek people involved in this film, the novelist Vassilis Vassilikos and that composer Mikis Theodorakis, both of them later were elected to parliament in Greece. Once the junta was toppled and there was a democratic government, they were able to return and be elected to office. So I think that's pretty fascinating that happens.
Vassilikos is one of the top 10 most translated Greek authors, Josh. So it's not just Homer anymore. Ha ha, Homer. And Josh, there's a 2012 Indian film called Shanghai that is inspired by this book. Have you seen Shanghai, Josh?
I have not, but it would be interesting to see how they translate this to a different kind of political context.
You like Homer, Josh? You like the Odyssey and the Iliad?
Sure. I mean, I read parts of those in high school or whatever. I mean, he's no Homer Simpson, but sure.
They're all philosophers in their own right. As you've mentioned, Josh, we've talked a lot about a lot of these actors, which is what we said was going to happen in this season, going back to a lot of our awesome movie year all-stars, right?
Right. Well, and I think it's fascinating that, right, Jean-Louis Trintignant, who plays the magistrate here, we talked about him in our 2013 season when we talked about Michael Haneke's Amour. And, late in his career, which of course he had, so many of these actors here are like the biggest actors in French cinema. And he had a very long career working with some of the top filmmakers in international cinema. He was in Eric Rohmer's My Night at Maud's and The Conformist and Three Colors Red and The City of Lost Children. So we talked about him in 2013. And then Yves Montand, we talked about in our 1953 season when we did The Wages of Fear. And he, again, is an icon of French cinema. And Le Cercle Rouge and Manon des Sources and Jean de Florette, which were movies from the 80s that I remember watching in French class in high school. And he also worked with Costa-Gavras on a couple more movies, on The Sleeping Car Murders and The Confession. But just the fact that 60 years apart on Awesome Movie Years, we're talking about these two guys.
Yeah, we've mentioned Perrin, also obviously Cinema Paradiso. I really kind of like that about because that was that was the first movie I've seen with him. So to see the older version and now this younger version was pretty cool, I thought.
Yeah, and he, as I'm sure we said then, was not only a prolific actor, but a producer, yeah. And later in his career, a co-director of famous nature documentaries like Winged Migration. So really a wild, varied career that guy had.
We just mentioned a lot of cool movies. So I haven't seen Winged Migration, but I have seen Microcosmos, which he produced, which is a pretty cool movie right there. So I would recommend that one. I've already talked about The Conformist on this show, and I highly recommend that. Antonioni, Three Colors. We haven't gotten into this, but we got to get into the Kieslowski, movies at some point. I might watch all three of them coming up here. Three Colors, Red, White, and Blue. Not in that order. I think it goes blue, white, red, but I'd have to look it up. But really cool filmmaking, long form storytelling that filmmaker was working on in the 90s.
Yeah, I've seen, I think, one or two of them, although I don't remember which ones. And The City of Lost Children, which Jean-Louis Trintignant is in, is a great creative early film from Jean-Pierre Jeunet. And like I said, the Manon des Sources and Jean de Florette, which are these kind of French period dramas I remember watching in class. I feel like it's a common French class thing, but very well made films. So yeah, a lot of great stuff. My Night at Maud's, the Eric Rohmer film, is really good too. So just following the careers of these actors who defined eras in French cinema, you're going to see a lot of great movies.
Speaking of which, Josh, the cinematographer, Raoul Cotard, is a guy we have kind of come across. He played the English surgeon in this film, but he was the DP for a ton of Jean-Luc Godard movies, including Breathless and A Band Apart. So, and Pierre Lafou, my favorite, as you know, Josh, and Weekend, which we covered. So I just mentioned a lot of them. He also worked with Truffaut and Jacques Demy. So a lot of all-stars here.
Yeah, this really is this kind of international all-star team here. The one actor in this film, as we said, who actually is, a major Greek actor, is Irene Papas, who plays the widow. And she was an international star for many years in Greek films, Italian films, French films, Spanish films, American films, all around the world. But she too was living in exile at the time that they made this film. So anything else you want to say about the legacy of this movie, Jason?
He lives, Josh.
He does indeed. So that is Z, and that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can topple our junta online and on social media.
We're at awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on the platform that needs to be toppled. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy, and all the things. Look out for Eat This Comedy. We're back and we're rocking, baby. Also, Josh, find me at Letterboxd, on Letterboxd at Go for Jason. And if you follow me based on this one, let me know and I'll buy you a chocolate bar.
Sure, that's random. You can find some old stuff from me at joshbellhateseverything.com. I am at Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, at Signal Bleed on X Twitter still, and on Blue Sky and on Letterboxd. And if you're on Letterboxd and you watch this movie or any of the movies we talk about on the show, tag your review Awesome Movie Year. We would love to know what you think, and maybe Jason will buy you a chocolate bar, apparently.
Possibly.
And also, you can listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts, and follow us on social media at Piecing Pod.
Jason, what are we doing in our
Josh, real fast, before we do that, one political thriller that I should watch. All three of us. Which let's all pick one political thriller.
Oh, I didn't prepare for this. I don't know. We just talked about Robert Redford. I'm inclined to say
All the President's Men.
All the President's Men or 3 Days of the Condor. Both great.
Yeah, I think those are good picks. Dave, you got any?
I don't, just because it's on the mind, Civil War from this year. I don't know if it's a great one, but it's worth checking out.
I'm probably a movie influenced by Z. I would imagine.
I think so. Yeah.
Jason, did you want to suggest one?
I've never seen any. That's why I asked you guys. So. No, that's not true. That's not true. I would have gone with the Redford ones as well. But how about the conversation? Get a little Coppola in there.
That is great. I don't know if I would have called that a political thriller, but it is a great movie. So, Jason, what are we doing in our next episode?
Josh, I'm excited. We're finally getting into some animation that is near and dear to our heart as children growing up in the 80s. Of course, this is from the 60s, but we all grew up with Charlie Brown. He's a good man. This one's called A Boy Named Charlie Brown.
So tune in next time for A Boy Named Charlie Brown, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.
Hold on, I'm going to sneeze.
Okay.
Should have got that in there.
Yeah, well, that might go in the post. Yeah.
If you're recording, it's there.
I don't think you can do it, Dave, because neither of you said bless you, and you both come off as buffoons.
Oh, so true. All right.